right, everybody. Welcome to the live cast. We are in the field today. We are doing a remote live cast for the first time ever. So this is breaking history. I actually had to be today. I had to take my son to get his wisdom. My son Foster to get his wisdom teeth out, and the timing worked out when our normal live cast is. But I didn't want to miss you guys, so I am here in the parking lot because that's how it works now, right? I have to sit in the parking lot while my son is having his wisdom teeth out. I'm not allowed in the room due to COVID and all that. And when he's done, they're going to call me. So he's been just gone in. So I'm anticipating it'll be a little while. So I have a few minutes to talk to you guys. And I thought, given the spirit of me being here at a doctor's office, oral surgeon's office, I would talk a little bit about digital transformation in healthcare. And I'm actually probably going to touch on education as well. And these are interesting areas because, of course, healthcare has had many digital components that have enabled it for many, many years. Digital record keeping systems for keeping labs, or other kinds of electronic patient systems. In fact, I remember one of the first digital systems that I saw that really got me excited in my life was in healthcare. I skinned my knee when I was in Maine on vacation as a small child. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. So as you can imagine, this is at least 20 years ago, right? No, quite a bit more than that, right? More than 40 years ago. And we went to the hospital, and this is in a small town in Maine. And the hospital had one of those green screen systems where they were taking intake for new patients. And I'd not seen that before. You know, I was used to people with pieces of paper. And not that I'd spent that much time in hospitals. And the other thing that was so cool to me is she had a light pen. Does anyone remember light pens? You know, it's sort of like a stylus, but connected by a little curly cord to the computer and with light at the edge. And you could use it to tap things on the screen. It was a very early form of touch screen. So she could ask me questions, you know, like where it hurts, and she could tap things on her green screen. And it wasn't actually that the screen was sensitive. The light pen could actually tell which part of the screen she was touching. So obviously that's a rather obsolete technology today. But that was my first experience of a digital medical intake experience. And well, obviously since then the world has digitally transformed in major ways. Although we have a number of industries, and I think healthcare is one of them, that has certainly been in many other ways a laggard in digital transformation. I mean, we saw banks, retailers, certainly the travel industry, certain media and entertainment industries that were really, much closer to the forefront of the whole industry really being substantially digitally transformed. And yet I suspect for many of us, the experience of going to our doctor's office is not wildly different than what it might have been 25 plus years ago. Most doctors' offices today aren't using systems even as advanced as the system that was in use at that hospital in Maine 40 plus years ago. I'm going to guess it was 43 years ago, in Bahaba, Maine, where I was. So, and I had a very recent experience that really kind of brought that home to me. And it reminded me of some statistics that I saw about the automotive industry. So allow me a brief tangent there. Accenture does studies every year for the automotive industry on what are a automotive buying customers' biggest priorities. So if you're out there buying a car, what's most important to you? And it's already 4 or 5 years ago that we surpassed the threshold where people buying cars, according to Accenture's data, rank the importance of the digital components of the car, such as the entertainment system and things like that, GPS system, as more important than the vehicle's road performance. So it's more important that the car have a great entertainment and GPS system, a great computer, basically, than the engine acceleration and the steering and the handling and all these kinds of things. Amazing, really, right? And of course, now it's become even more significant because our cars have more and more digital capabilities, whether that's automatic lane detection, and now, of course, other safety features. And now, of course, with Tesla and other vehicles, the whole area of autonomous vehicles has made cars one of the areas that's pushing AI technology, computer vision technology, and a lot of things like that to whole new levels. So I make that point because you might think, that cars are a very kind of a real world, hardcore thing, not something that can be digitized the way that, for example, banking can be. And yet here we see that the digital component of the vehicle, while clearly not the only important part, clearly if your car won't start, it won't get you from place to place, it's not delivering its basic value proposition. But yet the things that are differentiating vehicles the most, the things that are on the minds of people buying those cars, are digital components. And so I had an experience recently that I want to share with you in the healthcare space that I think really illustrates the difference we see in the market out there. And whether you're in the healthcare space yourself or whether this is just an analogy for you, consider this and ask yourself, where are you as a business in this process of digital transformation? And how important is it, and important to your customers, and how important is it that you potentially accelerate it? So here was my experience. I had been a lot to doctors lately, mostly not for myself. I have 5 kids, for anyone who doesn't know. So between the 5 kids, someone always seems to be going to the doctor for something, like my son Foster today getting his wisdom teeth out. But so this was about a week ago, and I had 2 doctor's appointments, 2 days, one day after the other. The first was my own doctor's appointment, and I have fewer doctor's appointments than most people in my family, but I have injured my shoulder, and so I probably a rotator cuff or something like that, still figuring it out. So I had to go to an orthopedist. And I went to an orthopedist here in northern New Jersey, where I live, and it was a very sort of digitally enabled office. And one thing that was great is, you walked in, and I'd never been to this orthopedist before, but I'd given them a little bit of information on the phone, like my name and phone number. And when I walked in, and I guess they had my address, they might have even looked up my address, but I walked in and they said, hey, you need to fill out, quote unquote paperwork, typical doctor thing. They hand me an Android tablet and they say, do you want to fill it out on our tablet, or would you like to use your own phone? And they had a QR code up that I could just scan a QR code and fill out all this quote unquote paperwork on my own device, or I could use their Android tablet. So I said, no, I'll take your tablet. So I took their tablet, and they gave me a stylus, just a little pen with a rubber tip, because don't need much. You don't really need a stylus, but they still offered me one. And then I sat down and went through a very simple, easy process of saying, no, I've never had a heart attack or cancer, or blah, blah, blah. All the other, no, I'm not allergic to penicillin. No, all the stuff you have to answer. And I didn't have to put in my name once. I didn't have to put in my address once. They had all that information. They just asked me the information on the tablet that they didn't have. And then they had me sign my name a few times on the tablet to various things, as they usually have to do. And I was done. And the rest of the appointment was less the point of my story, but that was my sort of intake experience. The next day, I have to take 2 of my kids, different kids, to their pediatrician well visit for the year. So take them to the pediatrician and, of course, go through the COVID stuff. And they hand me like a paper clip, a clipboard full of papers that I have to fill out, like 9 or 10 papers. And perhaps my mindfulness of this was expanded because of my shoulder injury. The reason I went to the orthopedist was for my shoulder injury, right? So it hurts a little bit to write. Believe me, there are other people who have much bigger problems than I do, but it does hurt me a little bit if I have to write or type or anything. So it was particularly obnoxious to me to be handed all these forms, some of which asked perfectly reasonable questions, but many of which asked my name, my address, my phone number, my kids' emergency contacts. Now, as I mentioned, I have 5 kids. My oldest is 19. My youngest is 8. We've been going to this pediatrician now for 19 years at this pediatrician. And yet I am walking into their office and being asked to fill out my name, phone number, and address, not once, but 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times on different forms. Because of course, every form they want to have that information on. And I'm sure you've had this experience as well. And it's just such a dramatically different experience. And when we talk about customer pain, I'm sure anyone who's been following this live cast, or certainly if you've read my book, Winning Digital Customers, available now at Amazon. We can put the URL up on the screen if anyone would like to get it for a special price from our own website. I'll just tangentially defer there for a moment for a commercial. Finding customer pain is one of the most valuable research activities, because it's the customer pain that's the opportunity for you to differentiate. And the irony here is I was sitting there filling out these forms, which were, by the way, not only were they paper forms, but they were like Xeroxes of Xeroxes of Xeroxes. Have you ever gone to the doctor's office and you could just tell like the form that you've been handed, is a 9th, 10th, 12th, 15th generation photocopy? So that was what they were giving me. Not that that mattered that much, but it just also added to the sort of, for lack of a better word, unprofessionalism of it. And by the way, none of what I'm saying has anything to do with the quality of medical care. I would say the quality of medical care that we've gotten from my kid's pediatrician has been excellent. And obviously we've been there for 19 years. Honestly, the orthopedist, he gave me a shot, didn't really help. So I'm not actually convinced that he's such a great orthopedist. But honestly, I'm having this experience kind of has made me think, gosh, I wonder if there are any pediatricians that have digitized systems like my orthopedist, because if there were, I have to admit, and it's almost a discouraging thing in a way, that after 19 years of great care for my kid's pediatrician, I would at least contemplate switching to another pediatrician if they were more digitally enabled. And this is a type of statistic we see over and over. We have something called Digital Stats Quarterly that's about to come out, which will be something that we're going to send to anyone who'd like it, which contains all the latest digital statistics. But I know one thing that's in there is it shows that in industry after industry after industry, people are willing to consider changing to a more digitally enabled, not just bank, right? Of course, a more digitally effective bank that's going to give them a better mobile app. Of course, that's something people are willing to consider, but they're willing to consider a more digitally enabled hamburger stand, right? A more digitally enabled, you name it. It's hard to think of a more digitally enabled, exterminator in their house that's going to give them a text notification before the exterminator shows up and allow them to reschedule their appointment digitally. Whatever business you're in, and I think being a doctor is a great example of one of the most kind of localized, personalized type of experiences where one might think that, digital transformation is less important. This little story of it, I think, kind of perhaps illustrates why it's really quite important no matter what business you're in. And, is what I was saying about customer pain. One of the best ways to find opportunities to improve your customer experience and therefore your market differentiation is through finding the pain that your customer is experiencing and seeking to alleviate it. And whether it's pain that they perceive as pain, they're annoyed that they have to stand in line for a long time or fill out tons of forms, or whether it's pain that they just accept. It could be pain they accept. Like people think, yeah, you go to the doctor, you got to fill out forms, until someone shows them a better way. And how many of us have been influenced by companies like Amazon or Uber and realize things can be so much better, right? We can receive things delivered in one day. We can be constantly kept apprised of the status of our orders. And then, I've heard clients of mine, when we go do research, we'll be working with a client that sells products that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, like big industrial equipment. And their customers will say, how is it that I order a $10 book from Amazon and I'm constantly updated on the delivery status, and I order a $275,000 piece of equipment from your company, and you don't seem to be able to keep me informed? You'd like to think something costing $27,500 as much, you could figure out how to keep me informed on delivery status. And of course, the answer why not is usually because they don't have the same kind of digital transformation. They don't have the kind of tracking and data systems that allow to make it easy for them to make that data accessible to the customer. And of course, to me, the ultimate irony of my little story here about the pain of having to fill out forms is that normally filling out forms is only just an inconvenience, and that's a kind of a pain. But in this particular case, filling out those forms actually put me in pain because of my shoulder. Right? So I was literally sitting there in physical pain, filling out my name and address over and over and over, swearing under my breath at this kindly old pediatrician who just has not jumped on the digital bandwagon. So that's what I wanted to say about healthcare. Obviously, I'm not talking about healthcare in general. There are many facets of healthcare, and I'm really talking about doctors' offices here. But again, I consider it less about doctors' offices specifically and more of an example. Something I'd like you to ask you to think about: what are the parts of your business, or maybe it's your whole business, where you might have deprioritized digital? You might have said, yes, there's probably a way to make this more digital, but it's fine. It's no big deal. I'm handing patients a clipboard. They're sitting there waiting anyway. There's no harm in them filling out that information. And by the way, I don't really know what happens in most doctors' offices, but I'm assuming that when I fill out all that information on a piece of paper, someone has to then take that piece of paper and enter it into a computer anyway, at least in many cases. So, in addition, there's cost, right? There's customer inconvenience and there's cost. And of course, it's not only doctors' offices that ask customers to fill out paperwork, right? So if you're asking your customer to fill out paperwork anywhere in the customer journey, I would suggest to you that you're probably creating customer pain unnecessarily and cost unnecessarily. And by the way, it's not only customers. If you're asking your employees to fill out paperwork of one sort or another, whether it's time and expense reports or onboarding stuff or performance reviews or whatever it may be, once again, it could very well be that you're creating extra pain and extra cost. And these are, of course, the types of things we look to address with digital transformation. So that's what I want to say about healthcare. And, I almost feel like education is a topic for another time. I've talked so much about healthcare. So I think I'm just going to give you a quick preview of what I want to say about education. And I think I'll talk about that in a future live cast. The thing that I have observed that's happened with COVID, and it's not just COVID, but of course, COVID has caused education to have to be transformed in many ways, obviously, right? We haven't been able to do in-person education, which is our typical model. And so things have become much more digital. Digital in the sense of using Zoom and other technologies, although frankly, mostly Zoom, as well as digital in the sense of assignments being sent digitally, assignments being turned in digitally, any to that, a number of many educational institutions were already doing those things digitally, but any that weren't were needed to accelerate in terms of making sure that they had digital methods for homework to be done and assignments to be turned in and tests to be taken. And things like the ACT and the SAT and AP tests have now all moved to digital formats so that kids can take them from home, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many, many ways in which education is having to become more digital. And so that I think is interesting, but I think it also does something that happens to many industries when they become more digital, is it causes a reflection on the fundamental value proposition. Because we have an idea, and let's take college education as an example, and I am a consumer of college education, not only because I have a college degree, but that's quite a long time ago, but because I am a parent. And so I have one child in college, as I mentioned. I have another one waiting for her college acceptances at the moment, and I have 3 more behind them. So I am planning to spend a boatload of money on college education, and already am. And I'm proud of my oldest daughter, Rachel, who's at Dartmouth. But man, those Dartmouth tuition bills, they bite. And therefore, I think it's reasonable to be asking the question, what about the traditional college education model is still valid, and are there things that we should be rethinking? Because digital has done something separate. I think digital has done something to education, which is separate from just cause us to have to deliver education in a different way. It's raised the question mark, what kind of education does the next generation actually need and benefit from? Because the world is changing so fast. One often cited sort of observation, certainly not original to me, is that if you think about kids that are taking a class today in business or even in a digital topic like digital transformation, that course was probably developed several years ago, because universities develop courses and then they run them for a number of years. And that kid may be a freshman taking a course that was developed 3 years ago, and he's not going to graduate into the workforce for 4 more years. By the time he's in the workforce, what he was taught is information that's 6 or 7 years old. And is that even relevant anymore? And is this whole notion of how we educate kids to become, members of productive society, at least the part of education that's meant to train you to do your job, becomes increasingly less logical in a model where we have 4 solid years of education, or if you go to higher education, if you go to master's degrees or a doctorate, you're 6, 8 years of education and then go to work. Because what's happening today, and we see this from so many people that are in the workforce, is it's a lot on the job. It's a lot just in time, because we have so many outstanding places to go, whether it's YouTube or Udemy or Khan Academy, or specialized places to go for specific areas of vertical education. So the whole idea of education has the potential to be transformed, not only by the potential of digital in terms of how it can be delivered. And obviously, we're seeing that with COVID being accelerated, but also in terms of the role that education needs to play in our world and our society. So anyway, I'll talk more about that in a future live cast, probably not the very next live cast, but there was just a quick 5 or 10 minute preview on some thoughts about education. Of course, I've said a lot about 2 big, huge industries, healthcare and education. I would love your comments, your thoughts. So please, put those in the comments, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching it on LinkedIn or wherever else. I know it's out a few other places as well. We look at all those comments because we have a tool that aggregates them all together. So don't worry, wherever you're making your comments, we'll see them. We'd love to see them, and either we'll reply to you, or if you have a question that kind of we think will be of interest to a large number of people, we'll address it on a future live cast. So hopefully this has been helpful. I hope this live cast got through to you okay. My phone actually says it has a 5G signal, if you can believe it. So I don't know what the quality of what you're seeing is. I am broadcasting from my car, from my beloved Ford Mustang, while waiting again in the lobby. I guess I should really sign off by saying something like, this is Howard Tiersky at Dr. Saker's office in Ridgewood, New Jersey. So thanks for watching today from the parking lot of my son's oral surgeon. Hopefully this has been interesting to you. I look forward to your comments, and I will see you next time.